Charlie Kirk redeemed a political class finds its lost cause by ignoring the rhetoric and actions of Turning Point USA founder. Pundits, politicians are sanitizing his legacy. Before he was killed last week, Charlie Kirk left a helpful compendium of words, ones that would greatly aid those who sought to understand his legacy and import.
You will never live in a society when you have an armed citizenry and you won't have a single gun death. That is nonsense. It's drivel. But I think it's worth it. I think it's worth to have a cost of, unfortunately, some gun deaths every single year, so that we can have the Second Amendment to protect our other God-given rights. That is a prudent deal. It is rational.
Absolutely I am. In fact, it's worse. It's worse. Were these blacks trying to go rob her? Happening all the time in urban America? Prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people. That's a fact. Black crime is a major issue in our country. Why are you pushing criminal justice reform exactly? Joy Reid and Michelle Obama and Sheila Jackson Lee and Ketanji Brown Jackson, they're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. Yeah, we know. You do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. You had to go steal a white person's slot to go be taken somewhat seriously. Now, the southern border is, of course, the great replacement. They're trying to replace us demographically. They're trying to make the country less white. It is an anti-white agenda. If I see a black pilot, I'm going to be like, boy, I hope he's qualified. Taylor Swift is now engaged to Travis Kelce. This is something that I hope will make Taylor Swift more conservative. Reject feminism. Submit to your husband, Taylor. You're not in charge. America was at its peak when we halted immigration for 40 years and we dropped our foreign-born percentage to its lowest level ever. Miss Rachel, you quote Leviticus 19, love your neighbors yourself. That chapter before affirms God's perfect law when it comes to sexual matters. In Leviticus 18 is that thou shalt lay with another man shall be stoned to death. Can we get that picture up, Ryan, of that Marvel's Avenger team? Now, I don't know who the person is on the left. Is the person on the left that came into the interview with Joe, the TikTok, your government is being run by freaks? So immediately I have like a flashback to a country where weren't able to do Bud Light commercials. What does being trans even mean? Is that even a real thing? It means you need therapy. We must ban trans-affirming care the entire country. I do think that there is a direct correlation between someone's testosterone and their politics. Young men, the lower their testosterone, the more likely they are to be Democratic.
So if you had a daughter and she was 10 and she got raped, and she was going to give birth and she was going to give birth and she was going to live, would you want her to go through that and carry her this baby?
That's awfully graphic.
It's no, but it's a real life scenario that happens to many people.
The answer is yes, the baby would be delivered. When blacks in America did not have the same rights they had today, they were less murderous, there was less break-ins. Why is that?
So I'm sorry, are you trying to say that blacks thrive under subjugation?
No, I'm asking you the question. The data shows they were actually better in the 1940s. It was bad, it was evil, but what happened? Something changed. I'm done talking about Epstein for the time being. I'm going to trust my friends in the administration. Joe Biden is a bumbling, dementia-filled Alzheimer's corrupt tyrant who should honestly be put in prison and or given the death penalty for his crimes against America. For example, Politico says top Republicans reject any link between GOP rhetoric and Paul Pelosi assault. Of course you should reject any link. Why is the Republican Party, why is the conservative movement to blame for gay schizophrenic nudists that are hemp jewelry makers breaking into somebody's home, or maybe not breaking into somebody's home? Why are we to blame for that exactly? And why is he still in jail? Why has he not been bailed out? By the way, if some amazing patriot out there in San Francisco or the Bay Area wants to really be a midterm hero, someone should go and bail this guy out. I bet his bail's like $30,000 or $40,000. Bail him out and then go ask him some questions. I can't see a single instance of Israel going out of its way to civilians.
You don't see a single instance of what?
Israel going out of its way to civilians. I see Israel going out of its way.
So you don't believe what they've done is genocide?
No, of course not.
It is somewhat difficult to match these words with the manner in which Kirk is presently being memorialized in mainstream discourse. New York Times columnist Ezra Klein dubbed Kirk one of the era's most effective practitioners of persuasion, and a man who was practicing politics in exactly the right way. California Governor Gavin Newsom hailed Kirk's passion and commitment to debate, advising us to continue Kirk's work by engaging with each other across ideology through spirited discourse. Yeah, and again, this just doesn't understand the purpose of actual good constructive discourse and debate, is that both sides have to be willing to accept that they're wrong. Both sides have to be willing to listen, and both sides have to be coming with fair and genuine, sincere things, and not just talking points that are meant to be slung as violent, or again, as a way to win the argument. Kirk never did this. Ben Shapiro never does this. Anyway, Atlantic writer Sally Jenkins saluted Kirk, claiming he argued with civility and asserted that his death was a significant loss for those who believe engagement can help bridge disagreements. Charlie Kirk never bridged a disagreement with the opposition. He only ever converted non-converts and people who were already on his side to more extremism. He never convinced leftists because he never understood it, because it was never designed for that. But we continue. The mentions of debate and engagement are references to Kirk's campus tours, during which he visited various colleges to take on whoever come may. That this aspect of Kirk's work would be so attractive to writers and politicians is understandable. There is, after all, a pervasive worry among the political class that college students, ensconced in their own bubbles, could use a bit of shock therapy from a man unconcerned with preferred pronouns, trigger warnings, and the humanity of Palestinians. But it also shows how the political class's obsession with universities blinds it to everything else. And the everything else of Kirk's politics amounted to little more than a loathing of those whose mere existence provoked his ire. Yes, again, the class thing is very important. Yes, you are of the specific class for the writers and the warriors or whatever who want to be able to both say whatever they want to say on the college campus, and they're worried that college students sometimes they'll agree with them, sometimes they won't, and they'll get upset about the pronouns or some trigger warnings. And I hate all of this, and this absolutely is in my class. I dislike the trigger warnings. I dislike the oversensitivity, absolutely. But I am still able to hold some degree of awareness of scale and importance. And again, this is what Charlie Kirk inspired. Assimilate to our culture or get the fuck out. Christian phobia, hashtag Charlie Kirk. And again, that's what they wanted. Again, and by assimilate, again, they just say, we want you to be exactly like what I am. I don't want you to be slightly different. I don't want me to become slightly different. I just want to be exactly the way I am because I'm perfect. In many ways, the Charlie Kirk and his following were as snowflaked, identitarian, obsessed as any woke pronoun, blue-haired person you might meet. Just, they had a slightly different aesthetic. It is not just, for instance, that Kirk held disagreeable views, that he was pro-life and that he believed in public executions. What Charlie Kirk actually said about whether children should watch public executions. And so a thought crime, a panel discussion show that he hosted before he died. During that show, Kirk said execution should be public, quick, and televised, and that at a certain age it's an initiation, referring to children watching the executions. Here's what he said. I want to see executions on TV. Imagine if Coca-Cola sponsored executions. That would be so American, so patriotic. Again, there's some tongue-in-cheek here. But again, this is the core here. The tongue-in-cheek is just this part. That would be so American, so patriotic. People would tune in. I think children at a certain age, as initiation, should be required to watch. Public executions by guillotine are holy. And again, this is along with Kirk and his co-presenter Jack Posobiec, Tyler Bower, and Blake Neff. I think at a certain age it's initiation. No, but hold on. You see, if all of a sudden you look at some of these savages, like in Indiana, there was this guy that went in and killed a pregnant woman and her 3 kids. And you know what? I want to watch that execution. That'll make my day better. But Ezra Klein tells us that we and he and all of humanity should look at and not just judge one person by this. And even if we do say that they're evil, what they did was evil and terrible, that for our own humanity, that we should avoid just, even if we're punishing them and executing them, we should have some degree of civility to avoid becoming corrupted by the actions and our righteous fury. But this is Charlie Kirk. I want to see him on public block and get him to be publicly executed. And you think that would be justice? You think children should have, you should see, what is the age? At what age should you start to see public executions? And again, he wants it during the Super Bowl. So yeah. He believed in public executions, or that he rejected the separation of church and state. He did absolutely do that. It's that Kirk reveled in open bigotry. Indeed, claims of Kirk's civility are tough to square with his panache, for demeaning members of the LGBTQ plus community as freaks and referring to trans people with the slur. Faced with the prospect of a Kamala Harris presidency, Kirk told his audience that the threat had to be averted because Harris wanted to kidnap your child via the trans agenda. Garden variety transphobia is sadly unremarkable. But Kirk was a master of folding seemingly discordant bigotries into each other, as when he defined the American way of life as marriage, homeownership, and child rearing free of the lesbian, gay, transgender garbage in their school, adding that he did not want kids to have to hear the Muslim call to prayer 5 times a day. The American way of life was Christendom, Kirk claimed. In Islam, the sword the left is using to slit the throat of America was antithetical to that. Large, dedicated Islamic areas were a threat to America, Kirk asserted, and New York mayoral candidate Zohran Mamdani was a Mohammedan, with Kirk supposing that anyone trying to see Mohammedism take over the West would love to have New York a prior Anglo center under Mohammedan rule. Kirk habitually railed against black crime, claiming that prowling blacks go around for fun to go target white people. He repeated the rape accusation against Yusuf Salam, a member of the exonerated Central Park Five, who is now a New York City councilman, calling him a disgusting pig who had gotten away with gang rape. Whatever distaste Kirk held for blacks was multiplied when he turned to those from Haiti. Haiti was, by Kirk's light, a country infested with demonic voodoo whose migrants were raping your women and hunting you down at night. These Haitians, as well as undocumented immigrants from other countries, were having a field day, per Kirk, and coming for your daughter next. The only hope was Donald Trump, who had to prevail lest Haitians become your masters. Again, this is just a tiny little bit of what Kirk did on a regular basis. It is insane that Ezra Klein is trying to say that this is doing it right just because he used speech. And again, I'm sorry, like, I understand, like, in the most abstract of senses, Ezra Klein is somewhat right. But to then chastise people so strongly for focusing on the 90% and the 99% and ignoring that tiny little core 1% just feels so utterly wrong. Especially because, like, look, we can say free speech isn't very important, but there's a reason why lying is bad, because what he does here is he is lying all the time. He is lying, misrepresenting, misinforming. The reason why we hate these things is because even though they are not violent, they warp our understanding of reality. They warp people's understanding of reality, that so much so that can cause violence. This is why we discourage lying, why we discourage this kind of activity, is because it is so harmful. The point of this so-called mastery was as familiar as it was conspiratorial. Great replacement. Yes, he was a believer in the great replacement theory. There was an anti-white agenda, Kirk howled. One that sought to make the country more like the third world. The southern border was the dumping ground of the planet, he claimed, and a magnet for the rapists, the thugs, the murderers, fighting age males. They're coming across the world from China, from Russia, from Middle Eastern countries, he said, and they're coming in, and they're coming in, and they're coming in, and they're coming in. you can probably imagine where this line of thinking eventually went. Jewish donors, Kirk claimed, were the number one funding mechanism of radical open-border neoliberal quasi-Marxist policies, cultural institutions, and nonprofits. Indeed, the philosophical foundation of anti-whiteness has been largely financed by Jewish donors in the country. Doing politics right, according to Ezra Klein. Kirk's bigotry was not personal, but extended to the institution he founded, Turning Point USA. Crystal Clanton, the group's former national field director, once texted a fellow Turning Point employee, "I hate black people. Like, fuck them all. I hate blacks. End of story." Again, a little warning here that we're going to be reading a lot of racist drivel here and transphobic things. Probably should have warned a little earlier on, but again, that this is what Kirk was. One of the group's advisors, Rip McIntosh, once published a newsletter featuring an essay from a pseudonymous writer that said blacks had become socially incompatible with other races and that black culture was an unfixable and crime-ridden mess. In 2022, after 3 black football players were killed at another college, Meg Miller, president of Turning Point's chapter at the University of Missouri, joked in a social media message, "If they would have killed 4 more N-words, we would have had the whole week off." Kirk subscribed to some of the most disreputable and harmful beliefs that this country has ever known, but it is still chilling to think that those beliefs would be silenced by a gunshot. The tragedy is personal. Kirk was robbed of his life, and his children and family will forever live with the knowledge that a visual record of that robbery is just an internet search away. And the tragedy is national. Political violence ends conversations and invites war. Its rejection is paramount to a functional democracy and a free society. Political violence is a virus, Klein noted. This assertion is true. It is also at odds with Kirk's own words. It's not that Kirk merely, as Klein put it, defended the Second Amendment. It's that Kirk endorsed hurting people to advance his preferred policy outcomes. In 2022, when Kirk was frustrated, for instance, by the presence of Leah Thomas on the University of Pennsylvania's women's swim team — Leah Thomas is a transgender woman — Kirk did not call for spirited discourse. Instead, while discussing a recent championship tournament, he said he would like to have seen a group of fathers descend from the stands, form a line in front of Thomas, and saying, "Hey, tough guy, you want to get in the pool? Because you're going to have to come through us." Again, the threat of violence is clear. Mere weeks before his death, Kirk reveled in Trump's deployment of federal troops to D.C. "Shock and awe, force," he wrote. "We're taking our country back from these cockroaches." And in 2023, Kirk told his audience that then President Joe Biden was a corrupt tyrant who should be put in prison and or given the death penalty for his crimes against America. President of the United States should be given the death penalty for the imaginary crimes against America. What are we to make of a man who called for the execution of the American president and then was executed himself? What are we to make of an NFL that, on one hand, encourages to end racism, and on the other hand, encourages to commemorate an unreconstructed white supremacist? And what of the writers, the thinkers, and the pundits who cannot separate the great crime of Kirk's death from the malignancy of his public life? Can they truly be so ignorant to the words of a man they have so rushed to memorialize? I don't know. But the most telling detail in Klein's column was that, for all his praise, there was not a single word in the piece from Kirk himself. Because for the most part, if you actually looked at the words and the ideas and the ideology of Kirk, and you were to sum those things down into a couple of statements or ideas and thoughts that Kirk has expressed, not just saying, "Oh, Kirk once said, 'Good job, champ,' to a kid." You can't just. No, we want to know what is the essence, the thesis of his beliefs. Who was Kirk as a person, as a political pundit? you didn't have a single word from Kirk himself, because you can't have it in there, because you know it makes Kirk look like a monster. More than a century and a half ago, this country ignored the explicit words of men who sought to raise an empire of slavery. It subsequently transformed those men into gallant knights who sought only to preserve their beloved Camelot. There was a fatigue in certain quarters with Reconstruction, which is to say, multiracial democracy, and a desire for reunification to make America great again. Thus, in the late 19th and much of the 20th, this country's most storied intellectuals transfigured hate mongers into heroes and ignored their words, just as right now some are ignoring Kirk. So what he's referring to here is, we could probably look at the link here, but he's referring to the, the Daughters of Confederacy and the efforts by the remaining bits of the Confederacy after the Civil War, during Reconstruction era, and afterwards, to kind of save the image of the South. This is where you get conspiracy theory style ahistorical notions of such as like the lost cause, to where the South wasn't fighting to save slavery and they weren't bad. They were just trying to protect their states' rights, and they were noble but perhaps incorrect in some of their things, and we need to really understand that these were good hardworking people, blah blah blah, all that shit, all of it just to, and again, the creation throughout much of the like the 19th century, the early 19th century, and the even the, I believe, the 20th century, to raise up monuments. Sorry, it would be late 19th and much of the 20th century, to raise monuments to like these Confederate generals. Because anytime you look at all those like these statues of Confederate generals and this is history, we marked our history here, and this is for the Civil War. A lot of those things were like done in like the 20s and 30s, decades afterwards. Nobody was wanting to commemorate or talk about the Civil War, and not in that way, up until, again, enough time passed. Reconstruction kind of failed because the South just didn't want to change being racist pieces of shit. And everyone, like he said, a lot of people, North and South, really just wanted America to be great again, and they didn't want to deal with the problems that had been created by the Civil War, so they just kind of papered it over. And then people started creating these narratives, trying to save the reputation of the South. So words are not violence, nor are they powerless. Burying the truth of the Confederacy, rewriting its aims and ideas, and ignoring its animating words allowed for the terrorization of the black population. The imposition of apartheid, he's talking about Jim Crow South, which is apartheid, and the destruction of democracy. The rewriting and the ignoring were done not just by Confederates, but also by putative allies, from whom the reduction of black people to serfdom was the unfortunate price of white unity. The import of this history has never been clearer than in this moment, when the hard question must be asked. If you would look away from the words of Charlie Kirk, what else would you look away from? Again, a strong piece, and again, I understand Ezra Klein, and I understand that kind of instinct and that desire. But as as Coates points out quite effectively, again, you can do both. The only reason why you think you can't do both is because doing this by acknowledging what Kirk said, and by saying his death was wrong and evil, but what he did was terrible too. And I'm not going to celebrate, but I'm also not going to mourn him. That aspect right there, just trying to be neutral and non-committed, that's not enough. They want you to love Kirk. They want you to do this. They want you to abandon it. They want you to abandon your values, to forget it. Why? Because by honoring Kirk, it allows you to do this. It allows them to more easily pass off the whitewashing of Kirk and the normalization of Kirk's idea, because they want Kirk to become normalized. They want these ideas to be normalized. Because by doing this, it's the first step. It's not a big one, but it's a step to where if you do this, and again, I would simply also ask, and quite frankly, I'm very confident in this, it didn't matter. Again, Democrats, leftists, everyone on Twitter, everyone could, Twitter, X, Blue Sky, whatever, could have immediately been extremely sympathetic or just didn't post anything negative at all. Negative or positive. They just didn't. It wouldn't have mattered. It wouldn't matter because, again, the opposition, the MAGA Republicans, they don't need a reason to destroy the left. That's their entire purpose, is to destroy left and to destroy liberalism. That's their whole thing, is to destroy this. They don't need a reason. They don't need to be egged on to do this.